What's your outlook like for 2023?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We did the most sensible thing. We went to our global partners in over 20 cities and we started to ask them questions like, what do you think? What would you stand for? What would you really think that 2023 would be? And it's not just because you read it somewhere or you heard it from some kind of seminar about this. Are you really, really being able to stand behind? And what would you really think 2023 would be? Nobody can predict the future. In 2022, we predicted some of the stuff, some of it we got right, some of it we got wrong. I think it's perfectly normal. So these are just some of the things that we think 2023 would be. There were 5 trends we saw, right? We think that the winners will become more attractive in 2023. Why do we say that? Because just as when we saw it in the dot-com, because a lot of us come from the Web2 world when we invested as either VCs or angels. And we saw, like, for example, Amazon, they came out of the dot-com bubble and became dominant. And we saw in the last crypto winter, when, for example, Animoca came out and became dominant, we see the same thing again that will happen. We know that because some of these companies have really good technologies, but they just didn't raise enough, just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And this is when these winners will do mergers and acquisitions of them and become much stronger. So we think that the winners of 2022 will become even more attractive in 2023. So that's trend number one. Trend number two, we think that centralization is dead. We think that decentralization is coming back with a vengeance for sure. It's not just a little bit or small kind of improvement, because I think a lot of uncertainty from the Luna crash, the FTX debacle that happened, a lot of things, people are demanding transparency. They want to be able to run to safety. So we think things like, for example, self-custody happen. The winners could be things like companies like Ledger, Trezor, where, everyone just pulling out their funds from centralized exchanges, keeping it almost like under your pillow, right? In this case, in your hardware device. And the age-old saying in crypto is not your keys, not your coins. So we think this is really a mega trend in the next few years that's going to happen. And we think that, yes, there will be a lot of flight out, but we think that centralized custody will still survive, because there's always a balance between, in a sense, two different school of thoughts, the yin and yang. And we think that some of the winners will be those who are able to connect the self-custody solutions to a lot of services that are out there. So it's really the convenience for them to do, like, for example, DeFi trades, buying NFTs, but having that kind of safety that is now within the hardware wallets or the wallets itself. So we think that is definitely one of the areas that will happen in terms of decentralization. We think definitely from a decentralized point of view, the first use case, or what we call it, the first use case of blockchain, which is Bitcoin, will continue to become winners in 2023 and beyond, because there's nothing that essentially can screw around with it unless factoring things like, for example, human intervention or human greed or having scams and things like that, right, that happened recently. So we think Bitcoin will definitely do well. I think the third trend that we see is that consumers will demand more security and privacy, right? Because this is something where having all the horror stories of people losing their life savings on FTX, losing a big part of their savings on Luna, I think a lot of people will then demand security and privacy. They will look at things like, for example, audit trails. They will look at things like, for example, having better smart contracts and things that are more secure. So this demand will definitely be there. But I think the fourth thing that we see is the open metaverse that will become mainstream. This is a very hard one in the sense that you never know, right? Because when Facebook became Meta, Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how do we access the metaverse using this Oculus VR goggles, or maybe in this AR and mixed reality. There's a lot of chatter about open metaverses. So we think that open metaverses will become mainstream because we've seen a gap that happened in the past, which is the brands, the luxury brands, the consumer brands were not there at all. But now we see a lot of these consumer brands coming in. We see a lot of this adoption of events coming in, right? So like, for example, New Year parties. In this case, we have things like a Lunar New Year party in Hong Kong, in the mega city of Hong Kong, in the Sandbox. So a lot of these cultural entertainment events are being picked up now within these metaverses. So this will attract more mainstream users and not just the Web3 users itself. And we see, for example, event-driven experiences like FIFA collaborating with Upland for the World Cup Qatar 2022, having soccer fans come and adopt the platform. We see things like, for example, digital twinning happening, right? Metaverse Seoul was created to launch a virtual replica of the capital city. We see Japan talking about policy speeches, talking about how to invest into NFTs and metaverses. We see a lot of these happening in 2022, and we see that going forward, we probably reach a turning point, maybe a point where this will continue to accelerate in 2023. So we think this is very mega trend in having this mainstream adoption in open metaverses as trend 4. And definitely last but not least, we think that decentralized AI, which affects Web3, will become a major part of our lives. So I think everyone has been talking about ChatGPT, how it can outsource writing, maybe even, I don't know, podcast choice. But we think that a lot of this has raised the awareness for AI. And we think this will have a spillover effect into Web3. So we see a lot of projects that do things like, for example, decentralized data exchanges protocols, which enable things like secure and transparent data sharing. And we see things like projects that do decentralized platforms for AI services. We see all these coming into fold in 2023 because of mixture of more mass adoption of awareness in AI. So one example I would like to give is also in terms of data analytics in this space of AI and data analytics is, for example, this company called Fever. They basically use a way to create experiences that you can have in metaverses. And this is based on your preferences, in certain kind of behavior that can reinforce better experiences for the user itself. So these are the 5 kind of trends that we are very convicted and we know that more or less will happen. We'll see in 1 year time if, how many of the 5 we get correct. But yeah, we are extremely excited with these 5 trends.